I only wanted shelter, but that sealed mold knew my grandfather.
Toi se dong dong kao truk sao fan trong tep. Dong thoi sua toan bo dai tu nu than. Nam de nat quan voi Theo Marlow. Da don markdown. One swa. Part 1. He was 18 and grieving. No home, no work, no family willing to keep him. Just a cracked brass bell in his mitten, and $1 he had saved from his grandfather's coat. And with that dollar, he bought a forgotten sleigh-bell workshop outside East Hampton, Middlesex County, Connecticut. Absent from county maps since 1978, the north sill had collapsed into mud. Half the slate roof lay inside the building. The county had condemned it on October 14, 2022, with demolition planned for early spring. But beneath the casting bench waited a sealed clapper mold no one had opened in 43 years, holding money, a winter ledger, and the truth about his grandfather. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Theo Marlow had been listening his whole life without knowing it. As a child, he could tell which stair his mother had stepped on by the complaint of the wood, which truck was turning into their lane by the looseness of its muffler, and whether rain would last by the pitch it drew from the barn roof. Other children heard noise. Theo heard differences. His father had left when Theo was 6, taking 2 canvas bags and the blue Chevrolet that never returned. His mother, Ellen, began moving carefully after that, as though every room belonged to someone who might ask her to leave. She worked mornings at a nursing home and evenings sorting invoices at a feed distributor. By 39, she had acquired the still hands of an old woman. The only place where Theo did not feel temporary was his grandfather's barn. Walter Marlow lived 3 miles away in a narrow white house beside an abandoned cider orchard. Every Saturday, beginning when Theo was 9, Walter set a wooden box of damaged harness bells on the bench between them. Some were split at the sound slot. Some had lost their iron clappers. Others were packed with green corrosion and mouse hair. Walter repaired them without hurry. He warmed each brass shell over a small alcohol lamp, cleaned it with powdered chalk and oil, then turned it in his fingers until the seam caught the window light. Theo learned to cut replacement clappers from soft iron rod, round their ends with a file, and suspend them so they struck below the bell's widest curve. A clapper too short made a thin complaint. One too long struck hard and killed the ring. At noon, Walter poured coffee into the chipped cup he had used since Korea and gave Theo bread with apple butter. Then they carried the finished bells outside. Walter held each one at shoulder height, away from the barn wall, and shook it once. He never tested a bell twice unless something was wrong. "Do not polish away the voice," he told Theo. "Shine is for the eye. The ring is what brings a traveler home." Theo understood only the practical part then. Brass removed too aggressively became thin, and thin brass lost its depth. Years later, the sentence would remain after nearly everything else had been taken. Walter died on February 3, 2022, during a night of freezing rain. His coffee cup stood rinsed beside the sink. On the barn bench waited 3 repaired bells, a small chasing hammer, and a strip of harness leather, marked for cutting. Theo found them the following morning, but the county ambulance had already gone. Within 2 weeks, his uncle Raymond arrived with a rented box truck. Raymond was Walter's eldest son and had the habit of examining a room before acknowledging anyone in it. He wore clean leather gloves indoors and kept a folded legal pad in his coat pocket. He spoke of storage fees, estate taxes, scrap value, and efficiency. Nothing was called by its family name. Walter's tools became assets. The barn became a liability. The bells became mixed brass. Theo tried to separate the 3 repaired bells from the crates. Raymond closed the lid over his hands. "They are sold by weight," he said. He did not raise his voice. That made the sentence harder to oppose. By March, the bench had been cleared, the leather straps bundled, and the bells poured into steel drums. Theo watched a scrapyard forklift lift them into a truck. Hundreds of small voices struck one another inside the metal, bright and disorderly, until the truck turned beyond the orchard. He kept one bell, because Raymond had missed it. Its shell was cracked from crown to slot, and its clapper was gone. Theo wrapped it in an old wool mitten and placed it beneath his mattress. The eviction came on April 18th. Raymond had inherited Walter's house and the smaller farmhouse where Ellen and Theo had been living under an arrangement never written down. At 7 that morning, he placed a cardboard carton beside the kitchen door. Inside it lay Theo's work shirts, 2 library books, and the framed photograph of Walter standing beside a gray draft horse. "Leave today, Theo. This barn belongs to me." Exactly 8 words, spoken while Raymond looked at the wall clock. Theo turned toward his mother. Ellen stood at the sink with both hands submerged in water that had already gone cold. A yellow plate rested beneath the surface. She did not look at Raymond, and she did not look at her son. Her wedding ring, kept long after the marriage ended, clicked once against the enamel basin. Theo understood. He carried the carton to the road, then returned only for his coat. In the bedroom, he removed the cracked bell from beneath the mattress and slipped it into his mitten. On the kitchen table lay a single dollar bill Walter had once tucked into a birthday card and told him not to spend foolishly. Theo folded it into quarters. His mother remained at the sink when he left. For 6 weeks he moved south and east without a plan that lasted beyond nightfall. He slept first beneath the picnic shelter at Salmon River State Forest, where wind pushed mist across the tables and raccoons worked at the trash barrels, until dawn. He had $37 from his final warehouse shift. In Middletown, he paid $14 for a bunk in a church basement and $5 for soup, socks, and aspirin. 2 nights later, the shelter filled before he arrived. He slept behind a laundromat where the brick wall stayed warm until the last dryer stopped. The bell pressed against his ribs whenever he rolled over. He walked to Portland, crossed the bridge in rain, and spent one night beneath an overturned fiberglass boat behind a repair yard. His money fell to $11.40. He stopped buying coffee. He ate crackers softened in water and an apple bruised black along one side. In Cobalt, a farmer let him sleep in an empty calf shed after Theo repaired a loose hinge without being asked. The farmer offered breakfast but no work. In Colchester, Theo slept upright in a bus shelter while mosquitoes found the gap above his collar. By the time he reached East Hampton, he had $1, 3 pennies, and a bus transfer that had expired the day before. He still had the cracked bell. The public library stood on Main Street in a red brick building with white columns and a clock that ran 4 minutes slow. Theo entered to escape a noon rain and sat near the local history shelves until his coat stopped dripping. On a corkboard beside the drinking fountain, beneath notices for piano lessons and a missing orange cat, someone had pinned a county surplus announcement. Structure and land, as is. Former brass goods workshop. 1 quitclaim transfer, demolition. Responsibility, passes to purchaser. The address was handwritten, 41 Old Marlborough Road. Theo read the notice twice. East Hampton had once been known for bells, though most of the factories had closed before he was born. Walter had spoken of the town carefully, naming makers and patterns the way another man might name relatives. Yet Theo had never heard him mention this workshop. At the reference desk, he asked for the county parcel map. The librarian, a narrow woman with silver eyeglass chains, studied his wet sleeves, but brought him the folder without question. The property sat 3 8/10 miles from the library. Theo placed his last dollar flat on the map, smoothing its old creases with his thumb. Then he wrapped the cracked bell more tightly in the mitten, returned the folder, and walked out beneath a sky that had begun to clear. Before evening, he would stand at the end of a walnut-lined lane and see what $1 had bought him. K. Tra Loi to Sua. Part 2. Theo left Main Street with the county notice folded inside his coat and the cracked bell cushioned in the mitten against his chest. A local bus carried him to Lake Pocotopog. From there, he walked 6 miles through wet woods and low stone walls. By dusk, it was 34 degrees. He slept in an open hay barn beneath a horse blanket, smelling of dust and clover. At first light, he returned to town. East Hampton opened by degrees. Barton's Hardware received its first delivery. Steam clouded Doris Bell's luncheonette. Cobalt Motor Service raised its bay door. Hale's Pharmacy lit its green lamp, while a clerk at Marston Feed swept corn husks from the pavement. Theo passed them all. The county office occupied a gray building behind the library. Fluorescent tubes hummed above vinyl chairs. A woman appeared carrying parcel files against one hip. Her white hair was cut square at the jaw, and 2 fingers of her right hand were stained blue from carbon paper. The brass plate beside her window read, Mrs. Evelyn Harrow, Land Records. Theo gave her the notice. You understand the deed transfers no warranty. Yes, ma'am. You understand the structure is condemned. Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested. Yes, ma'am. You understand demolition becomes your expense. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Harrow studied him, then opened a red-cornered ledger. $1. Theo unfolded Walter's birthday bill. She smoothed it beneath her palm and placed it in her desk drawer. Rather than the cash box, she typed the quitclaim form on an electric typewriter. Theo signed. Mrs. Harrow pressed a round brass stamp into black ink and brought the handle down, leaving the county seal with a dull, final thump. Old Marlborough Road north for 3 miles, she said. Left after the stone culvert. The lane is unmarked. If you reach Skinner Street, you have gone too far. Theo folded the deed into his driest pocket. Mrs. Harrow had begun closing the ledger when her hand stopped. Marlow, she said. Walter Marlow. He was my grandfather. She removed her glasses. My father kept a dairy team off Hog Hill. Winter of '69. The snow buried the lower fences. One mare went lame after dark. Your grandfather walked 3 miles with a tool roll because the lead bell had split. Theo touched the mitten. Mrs. Harrow opened a narrow index and found a card marked Marlow, Walter, Repairs. Beneath it were dates, names, and penciled notes. He repaired harness bells when people could not pay, she said. Never sent an invoice. He only asked them to bring the broken brass back. Did he work here? Not in the years I knew him, but he knew this place. What was it called? Marlow Vale, according to the oldest tax book. Theo looked at her. There were Marlows here? At least one. Records before 1910 are incomplete. Fire took some, flooding took more. She returned the card and pushed the deed toward him. The building may not be kind to you. Neither was the road. One corner of her mouth moved. Keep left at the fork. The right track ends in marsh. By noon the rain had thinned to mist. After the stone culvert, 2 ruts left Old Marlborough Road and entered brush. A mailbox leaned without a number. Beyond it, an elderly man in a red wool cap split kindling beneath a porch roof. A yellow dog ran to the yard's edge and barked 3 times. You looking for the Bell place? The man called. Theo nodded. Lane bends behind the walnuts. Dog won't cross the creek. The dog followed to 2 silvered planks, then stopped and whined. Beyond the creek, black walnut trees rose in uneven rows above the lane. The workshop appeared between them. It was about 24 feet wide and 52 feet long, built of chestnut boards over fieldstone. Several boards had curled from the frame. The slate roof dipped at the center, and the western slope had opened in a black seam. A square brick chimney leaned toward the road. Above the double doors hung a cedar sign. Most paint had vanished, but the carved letters remained. Marlow and Vale harness, and sleigh bells. Theo stood beneath it until water reached his collar. The left door resisted. He put his shoulder against it until the lower hinge tore loose with a cry of rust. Cold air moved past him, carrying soot, damp plaster, mouse nests, and old brass. His boots met a floor gritty with fallen slate. The front room held a counter, a pot-bellied stove, and wall drawers with tarnished pulls. Rain tapped into a galvanized bucket. When Theo brushed the counter, dust rose bitter against his tongue. The back room was darker. Casting benches emerged from the dimness, then iron tongs, wooden patterns, and shelves of blackened molds. Leather straps hung from pegs, stiff as bark. Near the south wall stood a foot-powered polishing lathe. Its wheel had collapsed, but one strip of felt remained soft beneath the dust. A mouse moved inside the wall. Beyond the building, water passed over stones with a low, steady sound. Theo found the well behind the workshop, capped with a rotten board, and an outhouse tilted among blackberry canes. Neither promised comfort. Still, the roof covered more ground than it surrendered, and the stovepipe remained joined to the chimney. He gathered fallen plaster into one corner, carried dry branches from beneath the walnuts, and chose a place on the front room floor, away from the leaks. His supper was the last of the crackers in his pocket. After dark, the cold settled downward. Theo folded his coat beneath one shoulder and placed the deed inside his shirt. The cracked bell lay beside his hand. Wind entered through the broken sill and disturbed something metal in the back room. A single note sounded. It was faint, imperfect, and deep enough to reach him through the floorboards. Theo remained awake, listening for it to come again. Some things do not disappear. They wait to be heard. Kautra Loy, 3 Sua Part 3. At dawn, Theo followed the sound into the back room. Nothing moved there except rainwater slipping from a roof seam into an iron ladle. He lifted the ladle from its hook, set it on the bench, and heard no note. Along the wall, several small bell shells hung from bent nails, but when he touched them, they answered with dry, broken clicks. For the first 3 days, the workshop gave him only ordinary problems. The well rope had rotted through 6 feet above the water. Theo knotted the sound portion to a length of harness strap and lowered a galvanized pail until it struck 17 feet below the rim. The first 2 buckets smelled of leaves and iron. By the 5th, the water cleared enough to boil. He reset the outhouse door with a nail driven through the leather hinge and scattered wood ash beneath the seat. At night, he learned which boards could bear his weight quietly. One creaked near the stove, 2 complained before the back room, and the plank beside the casting bench gave no warning at all. On the 4th morning, he walked into town carrying the county deed. Barton's hardware was narrow and deep, with seed drawers beneath the front windows and coils of rope hanging from the ceiling. The air held linseed oil, burlap, and the clean mineral smell of new nails. Behind the counter stood a broad man with one eyebrow white and the other black. "Arthur Barton," he said, "you are the boy at the bell shop." Theo Marlow. Arthur looked at the deed, then at Theo's boots. "You need more than you can buy." "I know. You planning to disappear with my inventory?" No. Arthur drew a ruled account book from beneath the register. Then I will give you 30 days. After that, you pay something every week, even if it is 50 cents. A man who pays 50 cents is still speaking. He wrote Theo Marlow across the top of a page and placed a thin manual on the counter. Its cover showed a man repairing a roof with one hand while smiling toward the camera. Library discarded it, Arthur said. The pictures lie. The measurements do not. Theo chose only what could keep the building from becoming worse. A chimney brush for $3.85, 50 feet of sash cord for $1.20, a pound of 8-penny nails for 74 cents, stove cement for $1.05, lamp oil for 38 cents, and a second-hand bow saw for $2.50. Arthur placed each price in the account book. No food on credit, he said. I did not ask. That is why I told you. Before Theo left, Arthur added a box of kitchen matches without writing it down. The chimney came first. Theo removed the stovepipe and stuffed the opening with a damp flour sack found beneath the counter. From outside, he tied a brick to the chimney brush, climbed the lower roof by way of a walnut ladder, and fed the line down the flue. The first pull brought nothing. The second released a soft black fall inside the chimney. He worked the brush upward in 12-inch strokes, turning it a quarter turn each time. Creosote came loose in brittle flakes, then in tarry curls that stained the rope. Twice the brush caught where a brick had shifted. Theo lowered it, changed the angle, and began again. After 4 hours, his palms had opened beneath 2 fingers. After 6, soot covered his face to the eyes. He climbed down, removed the flour sack, and shoveled nearly half a bucket of creosote from the firebox. A bird's nest followed. It was woven from grass, red thread, and one narrow strip of harness leather. Theo carried it outside intact and placed it beneath the walnut trees. He sealed the stovepipe collar with cement, waited until evening, then rolled one sheet of newspaper beneath dry twigs. He held a match to the edge. The flame leaned toward the chimney. Theo added 3 split branches and watched the smoke rise cleanly instead of spilling into the room. Heat reached the iron top slowly. He set a tin cup of well water there, then opened a can of beans Arthur had included beneath the manual. The first hot meal in weeks tasted mostly of smoke and metal. He ate, sitting on the floor with his back against the stove, one hand extended toward the warmth. The cracked bell rested on the hearth beside him. As the brass warmed, its fracture widened by less than the thickness of a hair. Theo heard it, a small tick. Walter had taught him that metal spoke before it failed, though most people noticed only after the break. The next morning, Theo began inventorying the workroom. He found 6 paired casting flasks stacked beneath the north bench, their alignment pins rusted but straight. A rack held wooden bell patterns turned in graduated sizes, each marked with a number rather than a name. There were clapper blanks cut from iron rod, a hand vise with copper jaws, 3 curved rifflers for smoothing interior seams, and a box of sound slot files, worn thinner at their centers. On the western wall hung a leather apron stiff with verdigris. Beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a set of chasing hammers with polished faces. The smallest hammer bore a stamped M beneath the handle. Theo held it to the window. The letter had been struck by hand, slightly crooked. He set it beside Walter's cracked bell. At the casting bench, several stone molds rested upright in wooden cradles. Most were 2-part forms for shells or small fittings. One mold was different. It lay on its side under the bench, gray with dust, shaped for casting clappers in 6 sizes. Theo dragged it into the light. The mold should have weighed 30 pounds. It weighed nearly twice that. He tapped the surface with the wooden handle of a file. The upper half answered with the flat sound of stone. The lower half gave back a dense, shortened note. Theo tapped it again. Not stone. He brushed the grooves clean and found 4 iron pins holding the halves together. 3 moved after lamp oil and careful pressure. The 4th had fused in place. He warmed the metal with the alcohol lamp found in a drawer, then laid a cloth soaked in cold well water across the surrounding stone. The pin contracted enough to turn. When the mold opened, there was no casting cavity beneath it. A cedar disc had been fitted inside the lower half, cut flush with the rim, and darkened to resemble old stone. Theo worked a sound slot file into the edge. The disc lifted less than an inch before something beneath it resisted. He stopped. Walter's voice came back through the file in his hand, not as memory alone, but as instruction. Never force a piece until you understand what is holding it. Theo shone the lamp along the opening. A narrow brass wire had been looped through the underside of the disc. He reached in with the curved end of a riffer, caught the loop, and drew it sideways. A wooden latch released. The cedar disc rose. Beneath it, the mold had been hollowed into a chamber lined with waxed cloth. Inside were 4 packages arranged so exactly that none could shift when the mold was moved. Theo carried them to the casting bench one at a time. The first was wrapped in a child's wool scarf. It contained 2 finishing hammers, a clapper gauge, a small brass ladle, and a pair of dividers engraved WM. The initials were older than Walter's tools, cut in narrow 19th century lettering. The second package held raw materials, short bars of bell brass, cakes of beeswax, sticks of silver solder, and paper envelopes filled with iron clapper blanks. Each envelope bore a size, a year, and a note about the tone it had produced. The third was a flat tin box secured with cotton tape. The 4th was heavier and wrapped in a winter ledger whose leather cover had gone almost black. Theo opened it first. The pages recorded bells repaired between 1931 and 1967. Beside many names, the price column contained a dash. Other entries carried notes in several hands. Team needed for Dr. Milk route during ice. Church road blocked. No charge. Return brass when able. Theo recognized Harrow, Barton, Boyd, and names, still painted on mailboxes along the road. During winters when snow closed the smaller lanes, the workshop had repaired the bells that allowed teams and sleighs to be heard in darkness. The final line had been written in blue ink. Walter Marlow, 6 cracked team bells, took to home shop. Theo sat down. Outside, the creek moved over stones. A truck passed somewhere beyond the walnuts, its tires fading toward town. He untied the cotton tape around the tin box. Inside lay envelopes of banknotes, paper rolls of coins, and 1 tarnished military medal wrapped in a handkerchief. Theo did not empty them all at once. He made 4 clear spaces on the bench and opened each package in order. There were $20 bills bound in hundreds, $10 bills in smaller packets, and several older notes whose designs he did not recognize. The coins included silver dollars, half dollars, quarters, and Indian head cents. Some had gone dark. Others remained bright where paper had kept away the air. The medal was a Purple Heart dated 1944. The name on the reverse had been worn almost smooth, but under the lamp Theo could read Elias Vale. He counted the cash once, then he counted it again. The total was $23,890. He wrote the number on the back of Arthur's account receipt. His hand made the 8 too narrow, so he crossed it out and began again. $23,090. The amount was enough for a room, food, boots, and months without cold floors. It was enough to leave the condemned workshop before nightfall. Theo returned every bill and coin to its original wrapping. At the bottom of the tin box lay a sealed letter. The paper had yellowed around the edges. Across the front, written in dark blue ink, were 4 words: "For the one who listens." Theo knew that handwriting. It was not Walter's everyday hand, the hurried block lettering used on repair tags. It was the slow script from birthday cards and the labels on boxes he had been forbidden to open as a child. He carried the letter into the front room but did not break the seal. The stove had gone low. Theo added 1 branch, watched the bark catch, and placed the tin box beneath the counter where falling water could not reach it. Then he slipped the letter inside his shirt. Night came clear and colder. Theo walked behind the workshop to the creek. Moonlight lay across the moving surface in broken pieces. He stood there until his fingers stiffened, listening to water pass the stones without keeping any shape they gave it. The letter remained unopened against his chest. Some things do not disappear. They wait to be heard. Cow, Tra Loi, For Sua, Part 4. Morning entered through the broken windows as a pale strip across the casting bench. Theo had slept little. When he took the envelope from inside his shirt, the paper carried the warmth of his body. Walter's handwriting leaned slightly forward, each capital made with the same deliberate pressure Theo remembered from labels on jars of screws and tins of lamp oil. He broke the seal with the point of the clapper gauge. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then you have opened the old clapper mold without breaking the cedar cover. That tells me you listened before you forced it. It is a small thing, but nearly every worthwhile piece of work begins there. My name is Walter Elias Marlow. In September 2018, Dr. Helen Price at Middlesex Hospital in Middletown told me I had pancreatic cancer. She spoke plainly and gave me more time than I expected, though not enough to put every neglected matter in order. I began this letter in her waiting room and finished it at my kitchen table during the first hard frost. The shop belonged first to Silas Vale, who began casting bells here in 1868 after coming from Meriden. His daughter Clara Vale married Nathan Marlow in 1896 and kept the books when her father's hands became unsteady. Their son, Elias Marlow Vale, born in 1901 in East Hampton, carried both family names and ran the furnace until he left for the Army in 1942. His son James returned from Hartford in 1946 and reopened the benches. James was my father. I was born in 1947 and learned at this bench before I was tall enough to see across it. Elias did not return from the war. He was killed in France in August 1944. The Purple Heart belongs to him. My grandmother Clara kept it wrapped in the same handkerchief you have found. The trade closed on March 16, 1978. The last order was 12 team bells for a farm outside Marlborough. After that, the furnace went cold. For more than 30 years, no one in the family spoke openly about the shop. There had been debt, illness, and blame enough to make silence seem easier than truth. Silence is rarely easier. It only waits longer. The money in the came from work done here, from coins set aside during good winters and wages my father refused to spend after the shop closed. I added what I could. Use it carefully. Do not mistake money for the inheritance itself. The inheritance is the work. If you cast again, heat yellow brass between 1050 and 1900 degrees Fahrenheit and skim the dross before pouring. For small shells, use 3 parts clean brass. Return to 1 part new ingot. Let the mold stand closed for 12 minutes before opening it, longer in cold weather. Fit the clapper so its striking point falls just below the widest part of the bell. Polish with chalk and oil, never hard compound, and stop before the surface loses the shallow marks left by the mold. A perfect shine can hide bad metal. A true ring cannot. You may find a stone marker beyond the back door, near the creek bank. It bears the old joining mark used by Vale and Marlow, a bell crossed by a narrow file. Beneath that mark, the families agreed that repair work during storms would be done first, whether payment came or not. The winter ledger records some of those repairs. Do not feel required to reopen the shop. Do not feel required to remain. A place should not imprison the person who saves it, but if you stay, work slowly enough to hear what you are changing. Inheritance is not possession. It is knowing which tool to lift, which damage to leave visible, and which task must be finished for someone you may never meet. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Walter Elias Marlow, November 8th, 2018. Theo read the letter twice. The second time, he placed one finger beneath each line as Walter had taught him to do with measurements. Then he folded the pages along their original creases, pressed them flat with his palm, and returned them to the envelope. He walked through the back door. Frost silvered the blackberry canes. Near the creek bank, half covered by wet leaves, a low granite marker leaned toward the water. Theo cleared it with his bare hands. The carving had softened under weather, but the shape remained. A round bell crossed diagonally by a narrow file. Beneath the symbol were 3 words. Storms come first. Theo rested his hand on the stone. The granite held the night's cold longer than the soil around it. Back inside, he unwrapped the smallest finishing hammer from the wool scarf. Its handle had dried pale and rough, and the head carried a skin of dark oxidation. He cleaned the metal with chalk and a drop of oil, turning it beneath the window, rather than grinding away its age. Then he lit the old alcohol lamp. The wick sputtered before settling into a blue-edged flame. Theo held the hammer near the warmth, not close enough to damage the temper, only long enough to wake the smell of oil from the wood. The scent was faint, but it belonged to Walter's barn on Saturday mornings. During the afternoon, kindness arrived without announcing itself. Arthur Barton left a paper sack beside the broken door. It contained bread, 2 tins of soup, and a fresh ledger marked against Theo's account as no charge. Mrs. Harrow came carrying a glass jar of coffee. She did not enter. She placed it on the counter and touched the carved sign above the door before walking back to her car. The old man in the red cap crossed the creek with his yellow dog and set down an armful of dry maple. He pointed towards the leaning chimney. Burn small until that is rebuilt. Near evening, Doris Bell from the luncheonette appeared with a covered bowl. She had flour on one sleeve and did not wait for thanks. Most lives are not turned by grand rescues. Sometimes they are kept from closing by a warm meal, a dry pair of socks, a ride across town, or one person remembering a name. What small kindness did someone once give you when they had no reason to know how badly you needed it? Theo ate the stew beside the stove. Before sleeping, he laid the dividers, the finishing hammers, the clapper gauge, and Walter's letter on the floor beside his blanket. The cracked bell remained nearest his hand. Outside, the creek moved through the dark. Inside, the lamp gave one careful flame. Cow, Teitra Loi 5 Sua, Part 5. The first snow arrived on December 3rd, laying 7 inches across the broken roof and pressing white into every open seam. Theo read the roofing chapter in Arthur Barton's manual 3 times before carrying a ruler outside. The workshop roof measured 28 feet from eave to eave and 54 feet along the ridge. Allowing for overlap and waste, he calculated 23 bundles of cedar shingles, 4 rolls of felt, and nearly 20 pounds of galvanized nails. The figures frightened him more than the height. Arthur extended the account without comment. Then he reached beneath the counter and brought out a roofing hatchet with a squared pole and a handle darkened by years of sweat. "My brother's," he said. "He won't be needing it." Theo took the hatchet with both hands. At the workshop, a retired roofer named Edwin Pike appeared while Theo was building a ladder brace. Edwin was 71, narrow as a fence rail, with the end of his left thumb missing above the first joint. He examined the sagging ridge, the open western slope, and Theo's arrangement of tools. "How much can I pay you?" Theo asked. "You cannot. Then I should not ask. You didn't." Arthur did. Edwin climbed without another word. They worked 11 days. First, they opened the roof around the worst sag and found one rafter split nearly 4 feet along its grain. Theo cut a sister rafter from straight spruce, raised it against the damaged timber with a bottle jack, and secured the pair using staggered bolts rather than trusting nails alone. Edwin snapped a chalk line across the new felt. Follow the line, not the roof. The old structure wandered. The line did not. Theo learned to set each roofing nail with 3 strokes, one to place it, one to drive it, and one lighter tap to seat the head, without splitting the cedar. On the 4th morning, Edwin pointed with the shortened thumb. "That nail's proud." Theo raised the hatchet. "Pull it." Snow melted beneath their boots and froze again along the eaves. Theo's shoulders burned each evening, but by December 15 the ridge lay straight enough to shed water. The shingles overlapped in clean courses, and the final seam no longer admitted daylight. Edwin descended, looked up once, and walked toward the road. Theo stood beneath the repaired roof during the next rain. No bucket rang. In January, the chimney began to surrender. The outer bricks had spalled into thin red shells, and mortar powdered beneath Theo's fingers. He removed each loose course by hand, numbering the sound bricks in chalk so they could return to their original positions. Arthur showed him how to mix hydraulic lime with sand and fireclay in a ratio of 1 part lime, 2 parts sand, and half a part fireclay for the upper throat where heat would be greatest. The mortar had to hold shape on the trowel without becoming stiff enough to crack. For 3 weeks, the temperature remained in the 20s. Theo worked barehanded because gloves dulled his sense of the joints. Every 15 minutes, his fingers went numb. He climbed down, held them near the stove until pain returned, then climbed again. He replaced the worst brick beside the flue, reset the cap, and tooled each joint with the curved end of an old spoon. Wind stripped warmth from the mortar, so he wrapped the chimney in burlap at night and kept the burlap damp enough to slow the cure. On January 27th, Theo built a test fire from newspaper, cedar kindling, and 3 pieces of dry maple. He watched from outside. No smoke leaked through the joints. No black stain appeared beneath the cap. The draft pulled clean and steady, carrying a narrow gray ribbon above the walnut branches. Inside, the stove warmed without filling the room with bitterness. Theo sat before it until his hands stopped trembling. The floor work began 2 days later. Beneath the grime, the front room held wide white pine planks fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails. Some boards had cupped. Others carried black stains where rain had entered for years. Theo lifted only the pieces too damaged to save and replaced them with pine cut from an abandoned loft Arthur knew about outside town. He rented a random orbit sander for $14 a day. The machine pulled hard enough to turn his wrists. Theo made 3 passes, beginning with 80 grit to remove the rough gray surface, then 120 to soften the scratches, and finally 220 along the grain. Around the rose-head nails, he worked by hand. Dust covered the windows and settled inside his sleeves. As the old surface cleared, the planks shifted from dark honey toward mahogany, not because the wood had changed, but because years of soot and oxidized oil had hidden its deeper color. He wiped the floor with mineral spirits and waited until no dampness remained. Then he applied the first coat of oil with a folded cloth, rubbing it thin enough that no pools remained around the nail heads. The second coat followed the next evening. The third went down 48 hours later, after the boards had absorbed the first two unevenly. Theo left the room untouched for a full 48-hour cure, sleeping in the back workshop beside the cold molds. One morning between coats, he could not begin. He carried the sander to the door, set it down, and remained there. At the marsh below the creek, a great blue heron stood in shallow water, its long body motionless against the ice. Theo watched until noon. The bird took one step, then another, placing each foot as though the water might remember carelessness. When it finally lifted, the wings moved with slow force above the reeds. Theo did no work that day. The next morning, he returned the sander, paid the rental charge, and finished the floor edges with a hand block. February brought the windows. There were 8 in all. 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked, and 1 held an original pane from 1788, thin and wavering, with small bubbles caught inside it. Theo marked that sash with a strip of blue cloth and worked around it first, preserving every piece of old glazing that remained sound. For the damaged windows, he removed the brittle putty with a warmed knife, lifting it in short sections so the wooden rabbets would not split. He drove new glazing points beneath the glass and rolled Diap 33 putty between his palms until it softened. Arthur had warned him not to press from the center. Theo laid the putty along each edge, then drew the knife in one clean pass, angling the bevel so rain would move away from the pane. When the line wavered, he scraped it back and began again. The sash cords had rotted inside the weight pockets. Theo replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot large enough to hold inside the counterweight. The first sash rose too quickly and struck the frame. Theo opened the pocket again, shortened the cord, and reset the knot. By the 7th window, his cuts were clean. The final window faced the walnut trees. He seated the last pane, pressed 4 glazing points into the sash, and drew the putty knife from the upper corner toward the sill. A chickadee landed on a bare branch outside. It turned its black-capped head toward him, close enough that Theo could see the small movement of its throat. Neither of them moved until the bird struck the branch once with its feet and vanished toward the creek. Theo wiped the knife on a cloth and lowered the repaired sash. It settled without rattling. Cow, Tutra Loi, 6 Part 5. Late February exposed the walls. Behind the loose plaster, hand-split oak lath crossed the studs in irregular rows. Much of it remained sound, though the wall beside the chimney had failed where years of heat and leaking rain had worked together. Theo attempted 3 patches there. The first slumped before evening. The second cracked around the edges. The third pulled free with 2 strips of old horsehair plaster attached. Arthur brought him a canvas bag from the hardware store loft. "My father kept this for no reason," he said. Inside lay clean horsehair, tied in pale bundles. Theo mixed lime plaster slowly, working the hair through it until the fibers separated. He pressed a scored scratch coat through the lath and left its surface rough. The brown coat followed at 3/8 of an inch, then cured for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The final coat was 1/8 of an inch, drawn thin with a steel trowel and softened at the edges with a wet brush. He stood before the finished wall after sunset. "These patches will hold another 100 years." He did not say it aloud. Doris began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Thursday. She was a compact woman with red-framed spectacles and flour always caught in the crease of her left elbow. The bags held biscuits, boiled eggs, slices of ham, or whatever remained after the luncheonette closed. Theo once followed her to the lane with 2 folded dollars. She pushed his hand away. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens. There was no use telling her that no shop had reopened and none had been promised. Doris had already turned toward town. Caleb Ames arrived on a blue Schwinn with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, long-legged, and had a white scar running through one eyebrow. Without asking permission, he began reducing a pile of maple rounds into stove lengths. Theo offered him 50 cents after the first hour. Caleb kept splitting, my mother said. About your grandfather, that was all. By afternoon, 2 neat cords stood beneath the western eave. Caleb left the maul beside the door and rode home with empty hands. Reverend Boyd walked Old Marlborough Road each morning shortly after 7. He wore a brown coat polished at the elbows and tipped his hat whether Theo was on the roof, beside the well, or too tired to answer. On the coldest mornings, he stopped at the creek bridge. "Keep his hand steady," he said. 4 words. Then he continued toward town. Theo postponed the cellar until February 11th. The entrance lay beneath a hatch in the back room, swollen shut by damp. When he finally raised it, 7 granite steps descended into air that smelled of soil and cold iron. The cellar measured 12 by 15 feet. Its floor was fieldstone, fitted tightly enough that only narrow lines of earth showed between the pieces. Shelves had collapsed along the north wall, and empty preserve jars lay unbroken beneath them. At the center stood a dressed granite slab. It was too regular to belong among the rough stones. A small craft mark had been carved into its surface, a round bell crossed by a file. Theo brushed away the dirt and tested the edges with his fingers. He did not lift it. Walter's letter had not mentioned a stone beneath the house, and Theo had learned enough by then to leave one unanswered thing alone. Under the 3rd step, something caught the light. A small oak box had been wedged deep behind the granite support. Theo worked it loose with a pry bar wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped like a sleigh bell, complete with a narrow sound slot. Beneath it was a tintype dated 1903. A young woman stood outside the workshop with one hand resting on the casting bench door. She wore a dark skirt, a white blouse, and a leather apron. In her other hand, she held a finishing hammer. Her face stopped Theo. The eyes, the long mouth, and the slight unevenness of the brows were his own features, carried backward through time. On the reverse, written in faded ink, were the words, "Clara Vale, daughter of Silas Vale, age 25, summer of 1903. Theo took the photograph upstairs. The brass key remained on the mantel. He tried it in the workshop doors, the old desk, the tin box, and every surviving cabinet. It fit nothing. By March, the snow retreated into the woods. The creek grew loud with meltwater. Walnut catkins lengthened over the lane, and damp earth appeared beneath the leaves for the first time since Theo's arrival. He decided not to begin casting bells that spring. The furnace required repair. The molds needed inspection. More important, his hands knew only fragments of the work. He would spend 1 coin from the cash on materials, melt small samples, and learn how brass behaved before asking it to carry a voice. The house was patient. So was he. Part 6. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Theo completed his first bell. It was smaller than the team bells in the ledger, scarcely 3 inches across, cast from 3 parts clean return brass and 1 part new ingot. He poured at 1,175 degrees, waited 12 minutes before opening the mold, and filed the sound slot by hand. The first clapper struck too high. Theo shortened the stem, heated it once, bent it less than the width of a matchstick, and fitted it again. Then he carried the bell outside, beyond the workshop wall, where no echo could flatter it. He shook it once. The note was not loud. It was round, clear, and deep enough to remain after the movement stopped. Theo did not test it again. Inside, the workshop had changed without becoming new. The white pine floor carried old nail marks beneath its oil. The patched plaster showed slight differences in color. 8 windows held against the wind, including the wavering pane from 1788. Walter's tools rested above the casting bench, and Clara's tintype stood beneath the lamp. The large furnace remained dark. Theo worked with the smaller crucible until his judgment improved. That same winter, after an ice storm split a lower walnut branch, he discovered a brass plate bolted into the trunk beneath 40 years of bark. Only one corner showed. He trimmed the bark with a grafting knife, following the metal without cutting into the living wood. The plate was oval and bore the same crossed bell mark carved on the cellar slab. At its center waited a keyhole. Theo brought the brass key from the mantel. It entered without resistance. Behind the plate lay a narrow cavity lined with lead. Inside was a folded 48-star American flag, wrapped in waxed cloth, and a note written by Clara during the Second World War. August 21st, 1944, my dear one, whoever you are. News came this morning that Elias was killed in France. I have folded his flag before the army has sent one, because a mother must sometimes prepare a place before grief arrives. The workshop is closed today. Tomorrow it will open. 3 teams still need bells before winter, and sorrow does not excuse unfinished work. Keep this flag dry. Keep his medal with it when the time comes. Do not make him larger in death than he was in life. He was impatient, generous, careless with buttons, and could hear a flawed casting from the yard. Remember him exactly. Clara Vale Marlow. Theo read the note beneath the walnut tree while sleet caught in his hair. He did not remove the lead lining. He placed the flag and Clara's note inside a cedar box, then carried them to the workshop with both hands. The Purple Heart was honored on August 25, 2025, the 81st anniversary of the liberation of Paris. Theo brought it to the Connecticut State Veterans Cemetery in Middletown and placed it beside a small marker bearing Elias Vale's name. No crowd attended. Mrs. Harrow stood with him. Reverend Boyd spoke the same 4-word prayer he had used at the creek. Theo held the folded flag beneath his coat while rain darkened the granite. They stayed for 11 minutes. From the hidden money, Theo used 4 coins. The first bought brass for practice. The second paid for fire clay. The third purchased cotton cord for packaging finished bells. The fourth, a worn $50, remained beneath the casting bench as a reminder that money was easiest to spend when given a purpose before desire found it. The notes and remaining coins went back into the tin box. Theo repaired the cedar disc and sealed the cash inside the clapper mold. He added Walter's letter, Clara's note in copied form, and 1 page in his own hand. Across the new envelope, he wrote, "For the next one." The shop reopened without a sign in a newspaper. Doris pinned an index card to the luncheonette corkboard, hand-cast, sleigh-bells repairs, accepted first ask Doris, for the address. The first order came from a woman in Haddam who wanted 1 bell repaired from her father's harness. The second came from a farm in Hebron. By the next autumn, Theo kept a mailing list of 43 names in the old front-room ledger. He accepted only the work he could finish honestly. Storm repairs remained free. Caleb returned in November carrying a wooden sign wrapped in a horse blanket. He was taller, broad through the shoulders, and no longer arrived by bicycle. The sign had been carved from black walnut and finished with linseed oil. It read, Marlow and Vale Makers and Daughters. Theo ran his thumb across the last 2 words. "There aren't any daughters here," he said. Caleb shrugged. "There were." He pointed toward Clara's tintype, "and there might be again." The letters were not decorative. Caleb had copied the narrow cuts of the original workshop sign and left the tool marks visible. Theo offered payment. Caleb shook his head. My mother said no. Together they hung it beneath the old cedar board, not replacing what remained, but giving the next line room beneath it. That evening, Theo lit the alcohol lamp and placed a clean sheet of paper on the casting bench. He began his own letter. My dear one, whoever you are. He wrote about the cracked bell that had traveled in a mitten, the cold floor, Arthur's account book, Edwin's missing thumb, Doris's paper bags, and the morning he watched the heron instead of working. He included no claim that the place had saved him. A building could not do that alone. It had given him work when work was the only shape he could bear. Other people had supplied the rest in bread, nails, firewood, silence, and time. He wrote the pouring temperature, the brass ratio, the waiting period before opening a mold, and the exact position of a clapper's striking point. Then he described the flaw in his first completed bell, and how little metal had needed to move before its voice became true. Near midnight, he carried that bell outside. Snow had begun, light enough that the creek remained visible between the trees. Theo stood beyond the wall, raised the bell, and gave it one measured shake. Some things do not disappear. They wait to be heard. The sound moved through the walnuts and across Old Marlborough Road. It passed the red-capped neighbor's dark house, the creek bridge, and the lane where the yellow dog had once refused to follow. Theo returned to the bench and finished the letter. He folded it along 3 careful creases, placed it beside the winter ledger, and closed the clapper mold. Before extinguishing the lamp, he looked once around the room. A small order waited near the vise. 3 repaired harness bells hung above the counter. Snow gathered without entering through the roof. The brass sleigh-bell workshop waits. It has always waited. In the county office, Mrs. Harrow kept Theo's dollar bill in the shallow drawer beneath her carbon paper. She had never entered it in the day's cash total. Years later, when the creases began to tear, she placed it inside a clear record sleeve and wrote one sentence across the top. First payment received in full. Script complete. Total approximately 4,200 characters. As cow traloi 7 kich, ban da huantat olua truok theodung, cow truk 6 pan. Fanket thuk la part 5e5h plus part 6 void dong. Script complete. Total approximately 4,200 characters. Kong kan fan tiep theo trong. Prompt gok da dan markdown. 1.